This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Mr. Dr. Buck Melton, who's been with us many times. Welcome, Buck. Welcome
Glad to
back.
be here.
We've had conversations on varying subjects that center around the Constitution, and maybe tonight we could discuss the obligation of government officials to preserve their records. Now, there's recently been some interchange about Secretary of State Clinton and what she did or did not do with her records. And is there any kind of wisdom that one can find in federal regulations or in the Constitution and law about what officials should or should not do?
I must admit that you've achieved a first. I don't think I've ever used or heard the words wisdom and federal regulations used in the same sentence before.
Yes.
But yes, I've been trying to sort through the legal requirements here. And it looks to me that at least since 2010, it has been by federal regulation a requirement that if you happen to engage in emailing in a private account, that you have the duty to preserve those emails for public records at the very least.
A regulation. Now that's not
Yes.
the same as a law. So what? Presumably, a bureaucrat has propagated some kind of requirement for other bureaucrats.
Yes.
But are there any legal sanctions, penalties? I mean, are there thousands of such regulations appearing every minute? I mean, and
Yes.
can you keep track of them? And and how does that work? I mean,
Yes.
if you're a bureaucrat or a federal official, there must be thousands of things that are being propagated, and some good, some bad.
Yes.
To comment about
I would back up just a little bit. I would say that a regulation is a law. It is simply a law that is established by the executive branch, just as court cases are law and legislation is law. It's just a different flavor of law. You do have a point that a lot of this stuff does not have a listed sanction. There's no civil or criminal penalty for failing to abide by it. On the other hand, you do have the president's executive order as well as federal regulations pursuant to that order as to what constitutes classified material. And that has a little more bite to it.
Well, no, just to go into these regulations, I mean, apparently there are thousands and thousands of pages of regulations. And do they have, we mentioned sanctions or whatever,
Yes.
can a federal bureaucrat just say, I've decided to, if you jaywalk, it's 10 years in prison. And that's just the way it is. And I've decided myself to do that. And I have an obscure sinecure somewhere. I just said, let's just give everybody 10 years in prison. Can regulations have that a degree of power and clout, and can they just be sort of anonymously put out there?
Yes, well, generally you think of regulations as having civil penalties. I imagine that you could have a criminal penalty involved as long as there was requisite due process. The courts would.
So that's what happened. So
Yes.
And they say, well, all right, I've decided the jaywalking fine is going to be $2 million, or whatever the story is. I mean, and I'm going to slip this into the Federal Register, and that's it.
I don't think you could slip it in. You'd have to have a 30-day period for public comment and that sort of thing. I mean, just recently we've had a couple of issues come up on that the courts haven't followed I think President Obama's amnesty executive order. There was not enough time for public comment given on that, and so one court has put the brakes on that just for that procedural reason alone. But assuming you jump through all the hoops and let the public comment on it, then I don't know why you couldn't do that. Once again, as long as due process was extended, you had the right to put on witnesses and
So if
compulsory process.
And these federal regulations apply both to federal government employees and anybody out there.
Yes.
So these regulations were propagated,
Yes.
and this is in 2009. So this would have been in the Obama administration, and the idea was, as I can recollect this, sort of the light of day in government process.
Yes.
And this was put out there, and then the regulations were established, and what
then
happened?
promptly ignored.
Well,
Yes.
well, that's right. And so how many regulations are there? There are 25 million pages of regulations, or 10
Yes.
million? And what, suppose you're a government official, you just say, well, I've just arrived in my office. I've been appointed the secretary of something. I'm a big government contributor. I'm
Yes.
the new undersecretary of commerce. I've never done anything like this. I walk into my office and someone says, whatever, well, let's go to lunch, and you happen to inadvertently jaywalk, and
Yes.
then
And there you are.
so comments about that? I mean,
Yes.
are they too restrictive?
Well, that's been one of the big criticisms about the old line, ignorance of the law is no excuse, that the law these days, for roughly the last 100 to maybe pushing at 130, 140 years, has started to become so voluminous no one can reasonably know all of the law, and especially the speed at which these regulations change. It's hard to do it. The problem is, in this case, I don't think that Secretary of State Clinton, former Secretary of State Clinton, can object because if I'm not mistaken, she actually fired a U.S. ambassador who is someone who reported to her for running a private email system. And I forget his name, but I believe he was an ambassador to one of the East African countries. And she fired him around 2011 or 2012 for running a private email system. So it seems to me she knew of this regulation.
Now, just to get into that, I mean, these regulations presumably are being propagated, thousands of them,
Yes.
many with good intentions. And so if you could ask, well, should we not have the light of day in government process? Should everyone understand what's happening so no knavery occurs? Well, that sounds reasonable, but maybe it is impossible to have a government process without knavery.
Yes.
Can you discuss an evil thought? I mean, people have evil thoughts. Well, maybe we could say, well, maybe we could just blow up somebody. That would be, let's just blow up North Korea. That would be great. Why don't we do that?
Threatening the life of the president is not just regulation.
But
it's
if you just
federal statute.
if you put some kind of just wild thought that crossed your head that you're not going to act on, and it was out there, then presumably what you're getting is some kind of restraint of thought, of some very intrusive inquiry
Yes.
into situations that type of inquiry is excessive.
Yes.
Any comments on that?
Well, I would say if it's something like that, if it goes to fundamental rights, which we've talked about before, if I'm a bureaucrat and I believe very strongly in political correctness, and I try to put out something that would clearly violate your rights under the First Amendment, then the courts are not going to let that stand. So once again, at the top of the level is the Constitution, and federal regulation cannot trump a constitutional provision.
So
or fundamental right.
if I understand, some of the things Hillary is saying is that, okay, that's all my personal things. I mean, maybe any kind of comments that I'll decide whether they were personal or not. Maybe in this trove of documents, she maybe said something crazy or whatever,
Yes.
just in the spur of the moment that she would never act upon. But
Yes.
if it's like if emails are like a stream of consciousness, if a person is unwisely doing that, I'm in a bad mood today, let's blow up North Korea, whatever the stream of consciousness is, that they would never do that, and it's out there, then people could extract that particular thought and just destroy the person.
Well, my wife, Carol, Dr. Melton, the other Dr.
Yes,
Melton,
there are a
is
couple of them.
one of the better things she's ever told me is never say something or write something that you would not feel comfortable having read back to you in a courtroom.
Yes.
And that's just the risk we take. And if she says that on her private email system that is not behind the government firewall, she runs the risk of being hacked. If she says that on an email account which is within that government firewall, she runs the risk of having somebody put out a Freedom of Information Act request and get it. So the answer is not the venue in which she says it. The answer is not to say it at all.
And just to go through this, so that's right. So just to make this comment, isn't this kind of a regulation that's basically telling people you can't use emails? And I think the very wise politician Bill Clinton, he has many qualities. One of them, I guess, is a knowledge of these things. He doesn't use emails.
Or so we hear.
And
yes.
only 2 emails. And many people, if you'd say, well, this is something that's discoverable. I mean, I just can't do that anymore. I have to go, I'm just going to close that type of access, which might be a detriment to just the way government smoothly works. If people are going through emails, it looks like we've had a number of email, quote, scandals out there.
Yes.
So people are saying that, well, these emails are discoverable. Now that you can't destroy the emails, we can get the server, we can extract what's out there. And isn't the message that's being sent everywhere in government that you've just got to stop using emails? Or if you do, they're so vetted that and isn't that the message that's out there? That you have to be very restrained about how you communicate, because anything that you say could be used against you if you want to say that. And your wife's comment about a court of law, well, people don't always, you would, in your course of your daily activities, you're going to say things that would not usefully be in a court of law, and how can you function if you don't say that? I mean, being a human.
Well, in a sense, this is not a new phenomenon. That back in the days before telephones, before emails, you would often see, and I think it's an interesting comment that we know this, that you would see the comment put at the bottom of a letter, when you have read this letter, burn it.
Yes.
Well, obviously people haven't been burning it because we have a lot of letters that say that at the bottom.
Right, yes.
So it's not a new problem with email. I think email exacerbates it because it is so easy to fire it off without a lot of reflection very quickly, and once it's gone, it's gone. And so it's been brought more to the public eye, especially since emails can be hacked, they can be replicated so quickly. But it's an old problem, and it continues.
But just to go through this, apparently there are a number of, just in former Secretary Clinton's behavior here, there were a number of, I guess, regulations that she's broken, and that's more than one. Is that right?
Yes.
There's been repeated efforts to basically, for better or worse, I would say, make sure that every single document that's out there, the public can have access to it.
Yes, and I think it's precisely because people say things, because a lot of people have been inclined to write "burn this letter" throughout history, that we have the Freedom of Information Act and that we have federal regulations requiring the archiving of this. It's the idea of open government and transparency. And so she seems to have been flouting that. And the reasons she have given have all rung horribly hollow. First of all, that she has deleted just personal stuff. Well, we only have her word for that. Secondly, did they go through all of these thousands of emails one at a time to check every one? No, they used a keyword search. So what if the keyword search didn't perfectly correspond to what they were looking for? That means that government records have almost certainly been thrown out when she deleted emails. Thirdly, she said, well, I did this because I didn't want to have to carry around 2 devices. I'm carrying around a very old iPhone here that is connected to 4 different email accounts. You don't have to have 2 different devices. Then she says that, she said this a few months ago, that she has 4 different devices. So she's being conflicting. She isn't giving us a clear reason why she's doing this. We all know why she's doing this.
Which is?
To dodge FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. And in doing that, she has almost certainly sent classified material through a private server in her possession that does not have the kind of government protection and firewall and encryption that it would on a .gov account.
Well, now let's discuss that. I mean, you said she's trying to dodge these freedom of information requests, and presumably, I think the AP is suing the State Department to get these documents. But if you're it must be a worrisome situation if you're a politician, and you have to do compromises. Politicians have to do all kinds of things, don't they? They have to raise money. I need $1 million to become president. Can you give me some money? And by the way, what about, let's see, putting a new irrigation ditch in my home? Oh, I'll certainly think about it, or whatever the story is there. or my nephew wants to get an appointment to West Point, whatever the deal is. These interchanges are going on repeatedly, and I can't imagine that this kind of interchange has stopped because of the Freedom of Information Act. But isn't it a sub rosa event happening? People are carefully disguising this, and it's. Do we believe that those interchanges have stopped because of freedom of information? I mean, or maybe they're just more disguised.
I'd say, yeah, more discreet. Yes, John Adams, among others, said that what we need is a government of laws and not of men. And as much as I like John Adams, and as much as I applaud the idea of a government of laws and not of men, it can't be done. I don't see how it can be done. There's no system that cannot be screwed up by human avarice or human dishonesty or human Machiavellianism.
And we have to expect that among our
Yes.
species. So we're just going to always encounter ill behavior from humans as long as we walk the earth here, and we have to try and minimize that. And what's the best way to do that? Now, one of the things that apparently came out of this discussion is the State Department sent out some number, as I can understand, I believe this is the case, 1 billion emails over some period of time, and only a very few of them are findable. A very small number, so presumably the mechanism by which documents are being preserved is just not happening in an enormous federal department.
Yes.
I mean, what's going on there? Any comments?
Well, not everything can get archived. If you look at the National Archives, and the original building on Pennsylvania Avenue has long since been outgrown, a lot of things have to be thrown away. And
Does that include emails?
Yes, and so it becomes an archivist's big concern as to what is worthy of being preserved. Now, I think in this case, I would say that anything that a Secretary of State sends in an official capacity can and should and must be preserved. And so she is disagreeing with the official government policy of that by trying to maintain complete control of these emails.
Just to get into this point, I mean, this is on document preservation and
Yes.
open government and seeing what happens. The idea of search engines, I'm not sure that I would necessarily, if one thought it was a good idea to preserve documents and preserve emails, it seems possible these could be preserved, and that search engines could be the way to basically discover what's up there. So
Yes.
wouldn't that be? You know, I find myself in the position of defending Hillary for the sake of our conference, which is reasonable. I think there is a defense there. I think there is a defense. But the using a search engine to see what's there, what could be there. I mean, if I were trying to figure out what was in 55,000 documents, I mean, oh my God, it's such a daunting thing. No one could easily go through that. Maybe you would just say, name every single thing I could have commented on that's whatever, or you could say, put my husband's name in there, my daughter's name in there, the wedding information, or I don't know, my personal financial affairs. Push that button and then take all of that, if that comes out. I mean,
Yes.
it wouldn't be perfect, but
Right.
could you dissect things that way?
There are many ways of doing it. You could search by date if you expect something was going on in July of 2013. You can bracket it then. You can use keyword searches. You can use statistical analysis. There are many number of ways of doing it. My problem is that it was not her call. That she was told to do this and she just decided not to when she was firing people for doing what she did. And there's also there's the security issue that she swears that, well, swears is too strong a word, but she has asserted that nothing that she sent throughout her entire tenure as Secretary of State was classified. Well, I've read the definition of classified as promulgated by President Obama as well as by federal regulation, and I find that simply impossible to believe that nothing she sent was classified. So she's keeping classified information that could be detrimental to American national security on a server that is not protected by American cybersecurity, that anybody could hack, that people probably have hacked, that going after diplomatic communications is a very ancient art and science. And how has she compromised American national security by doing this in order to protect herself?
Well, I think just so. I mean, for whatever. I mean, it certainly seems, for whatever, my opinion on the subject matches yours in regards to what should have happened.
Yes.
I would phrase it that way. What should have happened. We can explore that a little bit. But back to another point, which is, what are we getting? Everyone wants transparency in government. Why do we want that? The idea is that's going to stop a lot of knavery. So if we really know what's happening, that means everybody is going to be on the alert to act in a righteous way. They're not going to, like, I don't know, do bad things, and we're going to understand what's happening. Has the intent of these open records and these government regulations that have been promulgated, have we gotten a more transparent government? Have they worked? Or are we just in some kind of, is it just caused everything to go underground?
Yes.
And in this case, the efforts to do this were extremely, putting things underground were just, it did not work, and it rebounded against Secretary of Clinton's it was an ill event for him.
Yes.
Comments?
Well, I think they've worked, but I do think it raises another difficulty that back when the government was so much smaller, let's put it in 1795,
Yes.
just to pull a date out of the hat, that it was more manageable. I've often compared being an ancient historian or a medieval historian to being a 20th or now 21st century American historian. And it's interesting that you call both of those historians, because the problem with the ancient or medieval historian is a paucity of evidence, taking these very few scant
Yes,
records
right.
and massaging
Right.
them for anything you can get out
Yes.
of it. And if you're a 21st century American historian, you're buried under a mountain of paper or electronic mail
Yes.
or anything. So really one of the greatest problems to transparency today is not that stuff is hidden or classified or on a private server.
Yes.
It's that there is a mountain of material, and most of it just is of no value whatsoever. And how do you find it? Keyword searches, as you say, or targeting by date. But what are you likely to miss?
What I'm sort of getting at is like
hiding in plain sight.
regulations that are practical.
Yes.
I'll make one comment about historians, but in a way, the incredible amount of information that's out there is like people that observed a train wreck from different angles.
Yes.
So I was the engineer, this is what I saw. I was in the next car, this is what I saw. Historians sort of just adopt different
Yes.
viewpoints, and so what you could say is, in looking at any kind of event in government, well, I'm looking at this from the point of view of the taxpayer. Whatever I've discovered
Yes.
that all this knavery, and the other person might say, well, I'm looking at this as diminishing pollution, and this. So I could take that point, but to move on to another thought is that all these regulations being propagated, thousands of them, with the objective of making government more transparent and then stopping knavery, I guess you'd say it that way. We're making the case that maybe the knavery is still going on in some other way. Politicians don't use emails, they're getting and then what is the cost of these regulations? The amount of bureaucratic effort that's going into this. So is this really the amount of effort and difficulty that happens to get this transparency? Is this the best way to do it? Is the best way to make things work to have an anonymous person somewhere in the federal bureaucracy propagating regulation after regulation, presumably with the idea of doing some good, without any knowledge of the cost, expense, difficulty of enforcement? Is that a practical way to do things? And is this the transparency in government is a very laudable thing,
Yes.
but is it working, and should we do it a different way?
Well, I think that brings up a wider question. I mean, we have many different bureaucrats passing many different regulations, and only a minuscule portion of those regulations deal with open government and transparency. So I could turn around and ask you the same question about everything else.
Yes.
That some nameless bureaucrat actually decides when our sun rises and sets as to when daylight savings time begins and ends.
Yes.
The era of the specialist. Given the complexity of modern industrial society, that's the direction that we've gone in. Yes, you could come up with many more efficient governments. We could have an autocratic dictatorship, and that'd be an extremely efficient government if the autocrat was an efficient man. But is that the direction we really want to go?
Well, I would only suggest this, Bucky, that when people propagate something, they attach to it what the cost of the regulation would be.
Yes.
So we're going to do this regulation. This is going to take 12,000 hours, it's going to cost $700 million to get it, whatever the story is.
Yes.
So everybody wants transparency in government. What's the cost?
Yes.
Well, I think we've bounced that basketball a little bit. Now maybe we can get back to Secretary Clinton's behavior, which I think you're making a compelling case that was a bad idea. What happens seems to be, if you're knowledgeable about what's going on, it just seems like a substantial error on government judgment to have done this. Any comments on that? That's not a.
Well, she's not a stupid person, and I think for all of the people out here who hate her, and hate I do not think is an inappropriate word, that no one I've ever heard has ever argued or believed her to be a stupid person. You do not get into that type of education that she got into, especially as a female back in the 60s and 70s, without having a ton of brains and capability and judgment. I think she was trying to get away with something here and hoped she wouldn't get caught. I think this has implicated President Obama because he said that he didn't know that she had a private account. Well, certainly he must have gotten, being a BlackBerry addict, he must have gotten an email from her at some point that said it was from ClintonEmail.com. And this does not quite rise to the level of Nixon and the tapes because there's no allegation of illegality underlying this, these documents, but it is troubling.
Well,
and her explanations are even more troubling.
Yes, well, you used a powerful word, and that's hate.
Yes.
So one of the things that happens in politics is these emotions just come out about different kinds of figures, rightly or wrongly. I mean, some people, well, you could use the word love, the polar opposite of that. And there's some political figures people either love or hate. And I'm not sure that's altogether good to have such powerful emotional patina around different people. And just once again, back to Secretary of State Clinton, maybe this was, for whatever reason, just not the right thing to have done, and apparently she was substantially warned about that.
Yes.
But her viewpoint is, I guess, that it was so important to do this that for her purposes it was worth the risk. And I would just wonder, why would it have been so important to do this?
And the thing is, and I think the operational phrase is there for her purposes, because there's a very strong sense that her purposes are in this case not the best interest of transparency or of American policy. They seem to be very self-serving purposes, and I think that's what has people very concerned about.
Why would you just not, I mean, if you're in that position, just anything that you thought might be duplicitous, just put that on your personal? Why would you, I mean, wouldn't that be somewhat possible? If you're going to do some kind of deal or some political deal, in which I would expect her to be doing, I don't criticize her for doing some kind of thing like that. Just put that on your private account, or just keep things that are the State Department separate. And don't most officials do that? Why would you not do that?
Once again, it's easy. I have an official account on this old. I'll keep on calling an iPad an iPhone here. And I've got several private accounts on it. It's technically not difficult at all. And if she couldn't manage it, I'm sure she had a half a dozen people who she could have handed off to and said, let me do this. Obviously, politicians are put under intense scrutiny. That is one of the prices you have to pay. You and I have political friends. We know this. It's one of the prices you pay for being in the political arena in the modern era. But that's a price you have to pay, and you should know that going in. And given who she has been for 30 years, she obviously knows that. So her explanation that she didn't want to pay that price, well, I'm sorry, then get out of politics. Don't run for president. Don't be Secretary of State. So there's just really no excuse for that, especially when it can compromise American national security.
Well, and almost a final comment on that is, isn't our security so compromised anyway? It's a moot point, if I could phrase it that way. I mean, in other words, whatever documents were extracted, aren't there all sorts of extraordinary things that are happening with you? We look at things that have been hacked, or this happened, or that happened, and is that such? I mean, maybe you just expect knowledge of what's going on to be widely disseminated, no matter how hard you try and discover that and stop it. And just thinking about what America did, They were checking on Andrea Merkel's
Yes.
arrangements.
Oh, yes.
All the foreign leaders, the president of Brazil, they're watching it. So isn't that just the way it is?
Well,
I mean, everybody knows everything.
Well, we know what's been disclosed, but we don't know what hasn't. And since Leonard Nimoy recently died, I'll quote Spock, military secrets are the most fleeting of all, but that doesn't mean there aren't other things that haven't been kept secret, despite all the Snowdens out there.
Well, okay, on that note, thank you for
Thank you,
coming
sir.
tonight. We had a good interchange. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.